Hi everyone, welcome to the Accessibility in Person Making Industry Events Inclusive talk. I'm Nisha, a technical program manager at Xbox. I recently attended Gamescom 2022 with Brandon to represent the gaming accessibility team and support our guests with disabilities. Today, we'll be sharing our recommendations for making your next industry event as accessible as possible based on our team's experience. So from initial design and preparation to the actual event itself, there are lots of unique factors to consider at each step of the process. Today, we'll cover 4 topics in depth, quickly call out some of the areas we aren't able to cover in this talk, and then we'll leave you with some final thoughts and resources. To make an event as accessible as possible, it's extremely important to think about accessibility as early in the development process as you can. So for industry events, this translates to the design of the booth itself. So let's talk about booth construction and layout. Accessibility in a booth starts with all attendees being able to navigate all aspects of the booth. At Gamescom, we observed a caregiver who was carrying a portable ramp for a guest in a power chair. Many booths at Gamescom were raised slightly off of the floor, meaning that a power chair couldn't enter without the use of a ramp, which sadly many of these booths were lacking. Ramps into such booths or any elevated spaces of a booth should be standard across all industry events. One challenge that we faced at our booth was that while we did have ramps, they were placed in a way that wasn't easily noticeable, and so it's possible to trip over if you're entering at an odd angle. Stanchions could have likely prevented this. Next, in your booth, make sure you're using low pile carpeting throughout the booth that meets ADA minimum requirements, as this will allow guests in wheelchairs to maneuver freely once inside. Be careful not to add thick or decorative rugs. These are often used in living room style demos, and similar to high pile carpeting, it makes it impossible for certain chairs to move over. If your booth has doorways or narrow passages, ensure that these also meet ADA minimums. That said, it's always better to allocate more space than these requirements call for, because this year we had an entrance door section of our booth that technically did meet ADA requirements, but one user in particular with a large power chair was barely able to make it in. For those with low vision, it's important to include adequate lighting and furniture of a color that contrasts strongly against the color of the carpeting to make it easier to find when they need something or just to prevent injuries as they're maneuvering around the booth. Now let's move on to signage. Prominent signage at the booth is a crucial aspect of navigating the booth successfully. To cater to as many users as possible, signs should use large print, sans serif font, and a high contrast ratio between the foreground text and the background. Additionally, you should provide information in multiple languages if linguistically diverse guests are expected at your event. For example, Gamescom is hosted in Cologne, Germany, and so all of our signs were printed in both English and German to cater to most attendees. If you have signage that conveys significant amounts of important information, try to have alternative forms of that same information, such as full Braille printouts or Braille URLs to a dedicated web page. Lastly, there are many aspects of a booth that are not permanent installations but should be considered when designing the booth. For guests who are unable to stand for a long period of time, there should be foldable chairs that are readily either stored in or near the booth. And then for those who need a longer break from, often overwhelming crowds or noise at events, having a dedicated quiet space for guests is extremely helpful. Depending on the size and availability of this space, you can opt to either make it publicly available using signs or make it accessible via contacting a staff member. Whenever possible, though, try to have the quiet space within the booth itself or fairly close by. At Gamescom, we did have a quiet room available, which was great, but we could only secure one that was a fair distance off the show floor, and so that really reduced its utilization. Demo stations are one of the most crucial aspects of the gaming industry event. There are a few key ways to ensure that everyone can enjoy the demos that you showcase at your booth. Demo stations should be designed to be adjustable, informative, and capable of using a wide array of input devices. First and foremost, each station should have a tabletop and a monitor that are independently adjustable in height. Monitors should be able to be pulled towards the user and be able to tilt up and down, because this is not only useful for gamers in wheelchairs, but also for those who are very short, including kids, or very tall. For gamers in wheelchairs, it's important to design the desks or tabletops to have wheelchair clearance below them that allow these gamers to get comfortably close to the monitor. Lapboards can serve as an adequate backup when wheelchair clearance is not available. Make sure that all peripherals are plugged in with long cables by default to ensure easy compatibility with lapboards when they're needed. As you can see in this picture from our recent Xbox Bethesda showcase, we have demo kiosks whose tabletop height could be automatically adjusted using the control panel on the far right side. This made it extremely easy for users in wheelchairs of any size to roll up to the tables directly. For users with fine motor disabilities, it's imperative to offer multiple input options. Whenever possible, each demo station should include a keyboard and mouse, a standard controller, and an adaptive controller, like the Xbox Adaptive Controller. If space constraints prevent this, the ability to quickly connect an adaptive controller can suffice, for example via a USB cable. Additionally, ensure that you bring a wide variety of peripherals to plug into your adaptive controller so that you can create a scheme that works well for each individual. Quantity and variety are key here, as every gamer's needs are unique. And so ensure these peripherals are stored in an area that's quick and easy to reach to improve the process of swapping them in and out. Lastly, it's very helpful to have a display at each station that outlines the required controls for the game that's being demoed at that station. On the screen, you can see an example that was printed at the Grounded game. A great additional step is to provide quick links, URLs, QR codes, or Braille to have detailed accessibility information for each title. At Gamescom, we partnered with the Family Video Games Database, who supplied cards with URLs that linked to their site, which had accessibility information for all of the games shown, including the default input and button mapping for each game. Now I'll turn it over to Brandon to talk about accessible experiences and staffing at events.
Thanks, Nisha. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brandon Zahand, and I'm a Senior Gaming Accessibility Program Manager at Microsoft. Let's pick up where Nisha left off and talk about event experiences. Experiences can be a lot of things, not just demo booths. I've seen many other types over the years, and they can vary dramatically. For instance, at Gamescom 2022, one booth had a full-blown escape room. Another booth had a full-blown parkour course. I've seen booths with arcade-style claw machines with prizes, virtual reality simulators that move, and more. But not all experiences have to be so grandiose. Photo ops at booths are quite common, as are meet and greets with game developers. At our Gamescom booth this year, we had an airbrush tattoo artist decorating would-be pirates. Regardless of whether your experience is simple or complex, there are some basic steps you should take when planning them to help ensure they are as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. First, think about how people will queue up. Clearly indicate the entrance of an experience. Try to station a staff member there to assist any customers who require it. These staff can also bring customers whose disabilities make it difficult for them to stay in line to the front of the queue if needed. In line, make sure there's plenty of room for a powered chair to move and turn within the queue, especially if you're using stanchions. Ensure the queue is completely free of any obstacles someone might trip on or that might block a wheelchair. The same goes for any hanging obstacles like signs or decorations. Also, be on the lookout for height changes between the main booth floor and the floor of the experience. Sometimes experiences are put in after main construction of the show floor and come with their own raised flooring. Even though there may just be a small height difference, try to ensure there's a ramp to help people in chairs, as well as the rest of us who might not see it and trip. Once in the experience, think about how folks will interact with it. Considering the multitude of possible experiences you could be planning, we won't be able to cover how to make every single one accessible. But there are a few general considerations to keep in mind. To start with, think about any physical interactions someone must perform to take part. Like demo stations, any items that a user has to physically interact with should be adjustable in height and have adequate wheelchair clearance. If technology is present, ensure assistive devices are available to operate that technology and that any output is available in both audio and video form. Finally, think about any content in your experience that could be potentially triggering for individuals with phobias or who have experienced trauma. I'll give you a great example, which I will not show here so as to avoid triggering anyone with arachnophobia. At our last conference, we had a photo op experience with a giant spider statue for the game Grounded. Unfortunately, by the time our team realized how prominently the spider would be displayed, it was too late to make any changes to the booth. The best we were able to do was offer warning signs outside the booth and guided tours later in the day that avoided the area as much as possible. We also turned off lighting effects on the spider, as well as overhead lighting to make it less visible during those tours. This is a picture of one of our warning signs. It reads, in both English and German, "This booth features an oversized spider statue, 5.2 meters wide by 2.2 meters tall. If you have a severe fear of spiders, please find an Xbox staffer for assistance." In retrospect, had we had more time, we would have tried to create a partition to obscure the spider from the main booth, or had a curtain that could be drawn to hide the statue during certain periods of the day. So the moral of the story is that should your experience have content of a very sensitive or potentially triggering nature, consider finding a way to obscure it from the rest of your booth and make sure there are signs clearly posted that explain what content users will experience should they investigate further. One other thing to note: photosensitive epilepsy, which is most often triggered by rapidly flashing lights, is especially concerning. Most people don't realize they have photosensitive epilepsy until they have their first seizure, which may occur later in life. Since a seizure has the potential to physically harm someone or worse, just don't use those kind of lighting effects at all, as obscuring them and/or posting signs about them may not be enough to keep your customers safe. Moving on, let's talk about staff. Your staff are the last line of defense when thinking about booth accessibility. They are the folks who will greet customers, help them navigate your experience, answer questions, and troubleshoot any situations that arise in real time. As such, they are an integral part of ensuring that customers with disabilities have a particularly good experience. First and foremost, it is critical that your staff be trained properly in disability etiquette. All of our floor staff at Gamescom 2022 were given training materials that covered how to interact with individuals with a variety of disabilities. Training like this can be sourced from many different locations and should cover topics such as terminology, the proper way to guide individuals, respecting service animals, and interacting with companions or caregivers. Additionally, staff should know how to handle a medical situation and summon medical services quickly if needed. At Gamescom this year, we had 2 separate medical emergencies at our booth. Thankfully, everyone ended up being okay in both situations, thanks to a quick response from our staff and the EMTs on site. Also, it's important to have dedicated staff on your show floor that are familiar with the accessibility options in your products and setting up assistive technologies when guests require them. We highly recommend having a minimum of 2 individuals available at a time for larger booths, as complex configurations and setups might require booth staff members to efficiently and quickly get a station prepared to meet a specific individual's needs. In this picture, you can see one of our guests using an Xbox adaptive controller to play Grounded. In this scenario, having one person to perform a quick assessment of the guest's needs, while the other person ran to get the appropriate equipment, worked out really well. Once the proper equipment was retrieved, one person could work on physically setting up the equipment, while the other configured the various software and controller settings. Now, with all that being said, knowledgeable staff aren't of much use if those staff members can't be easily found when needed. Most of our floor staff wore bright green t-shirts with the Xbox logo on them, as well as lanyards identifying themselves as staff. However, an additional step we took this year was to make it easier for the gaming and disability community to find our disability and accessibility subject matter experts. As you can see here, Nisha and I were on the floor wearing black shirts with "Here to Help" in large white font. Additionally, a gaming accessibility logo in white was displayed prominently on the front of the shirt with the Xbox logo on the armbands. Signage with the same logo was also displayed, which read, "Here to Help. Please ask a member of the Xbox staff if you have any specific needs. We are here to make sure you have a great experience. For more information, visit xbox.com/accessibility." Now, that said, we could have done better this year. Most of the time, we had 2 of us on the floor. We always had at least 1. However, when the booth got crowded, it became hard for people to locate us. One guest told us after the event that they were never able to find Nisha or I. In hindsight, having an information desk that customers could have visited to request assistance would have helped a lot. Speaking of staff, another key component to a highly accessible booth is having sign language interpreters on site for those who require them. This year at Gamescom, we had American Sign Language, British Sign Language, and German Sign Language interpreters. After reviewing the interactions we had at the event, we realized all of them were with native German Sign Language speakers, which makes sense since Gamescom was held in Germany. Going forward, we may streamline our sign language interpreters based on this data to focus primarily on interpreting the host country's signed language. Here's a photo of one of our amazing BSL interpreters. You can also see the badge we made for her, using a relatively universal symbol for interpreting. One learning we took away from the event was, even with these badges, a number of folks who came through the event didn't realize we had interpreters available. In the future, we'll put out signage indicating the availability of interpreters and how to request them. My final note on staff. You may have noticed in previous pictures that Nisha and I were rocking some really stylish fanny packs at the conference. The reason? Each of those packs were stuffed full of sensory processing aids to hand out to individuals who needed them. Sensory processing aids can be really helpful for people like myself who have sensory processing disorder. You can see what we offered here. We had pairs of dark glasses, disposable earplugs, and small fidget toys. The earplugs were, by far, our #1 asked for sensory processing aid. That's because, even for folks without any audio sensitivity, Gamescom was loud. We kept looking out for folks covering both ears, and if we saw them, we'd proactively run up and give them plugs. So you've done your homework, you've prepped, and the big day has finally arrived. Is your work done? Not by a long shot. Let's talk a bit about what you can be doing during and after the event to make sure future events are even smoother and more accessible. At Gamescom 2022, we had 2 of us who staffed the entirety of the event, and we quickly learned it was important for us to create an efficient daily preparation routine if we were going to survive. Every morning, I tested the wheelchair lift to the stage, replenished accessibility information cards at each demo station, and checked in on our sign language interpreters to make sure they had what they needed. In parallel, Nisha checked each of our demo stations to ensure that they were still equipped with a USB-C cable for our Xbox adaptive controllers. With the high volume of guests each day at the booth, it was common for cables to slip behind the stations. Verifying each cable was readily available each morning saved us a lot of time throughout the day when an Xbox adaptive controller was needed. The last step of our daily routine was doing a quick walkthrough of the booth. We paid particularly close attention to ensuring that the queues and their entrances and exits were still wide enough for guests in wheelchairs to easily navigate. Now, notes and photos. Designate at least one staff member to take detailed notes about your experiences throughout the event. Nisha was our note taker, and she was awesome. Each day, we tracked the number of guests we observed who used wheelchairs, requested sign language interpreters, tried an Xbox adaptive controller, and more. These statistics were collected so we could record the impact our efforts had at this event, as well as provide insight into how we could adjust resources at future events to provide an even better experience. We also jotted down more improvement opportunities we discovered, key wins we observed, and meaningful interactions we had. And throughout the event, we both took plenty of photos to share with our team when we returned. So, what should you do with all this information you've collected once the event is over? Do what we did and put together an event report. Celebrate the wins, reflect on the misses, thank those who helped, and educate your leaders on the importance of accessibility at your events. Showcasing the positive impact your work had will encourage continued investment in future events. The report our team put together for Gamescom 2022 was 17 pages long, and it included 1. An executive summary with high-level overview of the event and our participation. 2. Statistics on interactions with attendees, such as how many sensory processing aids we gave out. 3. Anecdotes from staff members relaying both positive and disappointing interactions our community had. 4. The roles and responsibilities of each of our accessibility subject matter experts leading up to and during the event. 5. Key accessibility wins that delighted our guests. 6. Mistakes we made and ways to improve going forward. And 7. Commentary, both positive and constructive, from social media to further our learnings. So, that's it for staffing. Now, being cognizant of the time, let me briefly run through all the various things we were not able to cover in this talk. Events require a lot of planning, as you've already seen, and we weren't even able to dive that deep into the topics we covered. Yet there are so many other aspects that need to be considered. If you have registration systems for guests, either before the event or at the booth during the event, those need to be accessible. Similarly, any communication sent out before, during, or after the event should also meet WCAG standards to ensure accessibility. Now, if you're lucky enough to be choosing your own venue, not only should it be compliant with local regulations, but it should go above and beyond them. As an example, one venue we recently used had a very tiny bathroom that was technically ADA compliant, but one of our guests in a power chair still had difficulty maneuvering it. Food can be tricky, not only from a dietary restriction standpoint, but from a serving standpoint. Having wait staff on hand to help those who require assistance goes a long way. With regards to swag and merch, catalogs should be available for all merch offered with large pictures, text, and braille. And try to offer a variety of swag that can be utilized by a variety of different individuals, regardless of their disabilities. If you're giving presentations, study up on how you can make those accessible. Have both live captions and interpreters available to assist those who require them. And be sure to describe any visual content on your slides for those with little or no vision. And stages. Please, please, please. If you're going to have a stage, have a ramp or chairlift to the stage, even if you aren't sure you'll use it. Despite the fact that we had no guests who used wheelchairs booked for our stage during Gamescom, we still made sure we had a wheelchair ramp just in case. This is important if there are any last-minute changes in scheduled speakers, or if there's an unexpected opportunity to bring guests on stage that would require a wheelchair. Even a speaker who can normally navigate stairs may end up injured unexpectedly and need another way to get up there. Also, we talked about this before briefly, but test your wheelchair lifts every morning at a minimum. I'm not quite sure why, but these things have a knack for failing at the most inopportune times. At one event I went to, a speaker in a wheelchair had to be lifted out of their chair and carried on stage because the wheelchair lift failed and they couldn't get it working in time for their talk. That isn't something you ever want to put someone through. I hope we'll have more opportunities to dive into various aspects of event accessibility at future game conferences. But the information here should go a long way towards making your events more inclusive for gamers with disabilities. There are a lot of things to consider when planning, so start planning early. Doing so will reduce overall costs, lessen the chance of you missing something, and prevent those crazy last-minute fire drills right before or even during an event. Next, don't be afraid to make mistakes. We made a number of mistakes at Gamescom 2022, only some of which we mentioned here today. It's okay. As long as you're making a genuine best effort and applying learnings to future events, the gaming and disability community will support and appreciate you. And remember, keep the community in the know. Before your event, let potential guests know about the accommodations you'll be providing. If something changes during the event, send out a notification via social channels or other event communication methods. And after your event, let the community know what you've learned and how you plan on improving. And all along the way, solicit feedback regularly from your guests with disabilities. Oh, and on a personal note, I just want to take a moment to send a shout out to all the incredible members from the gaming and disability community who take the time to show up to our events to meet with us, share their stories, and provide feedback on our products. After being away from the community for such a long time due to COVID, it has been so wonderful to see you all in person again. Our team is looking forward to seeing even more of you in the coming months. The same goes for the incredible advocates who show up as well. We are so appreciative of all that you do and love learning from and partnering with you. Keep up the great work. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank all of the amazing folks at Microsoft who help make our events so accessible. Jennifer Nichols, Arya Brickner McDonald, Sean McIntyre, Kim Coons, Dave McCarthy, our stellar brand ambassadors, and the rest of the Xbox gaming accessibility team, to name a few. There is no way one person can make an event accessible on their own. As they say, it takes teamwork to make the dream work. On behalf of Nisha, myself, and the entire gaming accessibility team at Xbox, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. For more information on game accessibility for players, visit https://xbox.com/accessibility. For developer resources, programs, and more, visit https://aka.ms/xga. And finally, if you'd like to chat more about gaming accessibility or accessible events, hit us up. You can find me on Twitter at BrandonZ and Nisha on LinkedIn at Nisha-Patel12. Thanks again. Take care.